With each and every exploration, there is a discovery to be made. For some, it is the prospect of acquiring material possessions that makes the journey worthwhile. For others, it is the thrill of the treasure hunt that makes the conquest significant. For Mr. John Keats, it was the pursuit of literary knowledge. By allowing himself to embark on Homer's maiden voyage, John Keats discovers a new perspective on a classic tale, thus allowing him to reinvent himself as a watcher of the skies. This is
On First Looking into Chapman's Homer by John Keats.
Much have I travelled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told, that deep-browed Homer ruled as his demesne. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I, like some watcher of the skies, when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien.
The speaker is the author John Keats, writing from a first-person point of view. He seems to be familiar with the works of Homer and other esteemed Greek authors. More so, it is clear that John Keats is an educated man who is familiar with historical, scientific, and literary references, as evident in the latter parts of the poem. It is also important to note that Keats seems to be an introvert, and thus intimately familiar with his own emphatic responses and feelings.
Since the poem is a self-reflection, the audience is the speaker himself. However, the audience could also be anybody who has ever experienced such a response from just about anything.
The setting of the poem is presumably in Britain during 1816, as it is a reflection of Keats's state of mind. The poem is set after reading Chapman's Homer, as this marks a turning point in the thought of the speaker. The locations referred to in the poem are not where the speaker has physically been, but are instead referred to as the places he has been to while reading. While reading, he seems to be transported into the journey that is taking place. This poem was written during the Romantic period of literature.
The central purpose of the poem is to describe a rediscovery and a profound epiphany John Keats has experienced upon reading Chapman's Homer. He read the Odyssey with Clark and wrote this poem the morning after. In the poem, Keats describes a shift in his perspective towards Homer's works. It reflects his intellectual journey. He compares his shift in attitude to that of Cortez's discovery of the Pacific. While Cortez may not have been the first to find such a vast and new world, he still took in the magnitude of the experience as equally, if not as more than as Balboa did.
The poem reflects romanticism by concentrating on the feelings of an individual. John Keats details a personal exploration, or journey, which culminates in a unique and powerful discovery in the perspective of the individual. Anti-materialism is indirectly mentioned because the point of discovery to Keats is not to be the first or attain material wealth. It has an impact on the individual's mindset, and that's what matters.
After reviewing the vocabulary and hearing the poem read out loud, what do you think the journey is referring to?
Did you say a personal reflection of a classic literary text based on the overall motif of a journey? Very good!
The underlying motif of the poem is a journey which John Keats utilizes to express his newfound respect for Homer. Homer is a Greek poet, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Chapman, a writer from the 17th century, translated the poems from Greek to English. He also changed the meter from the original dactylic hexameter to iambic pentameter and iambic heptameter for the Odyssey and the Iliad, respectively.
John Keats, a Romantic poet from the late 18th to early 19th centuries, read Chapman's translation with his teacher, Charles Cowden Clark.
Triple C, where you at? Yeah.
Upon finishing the text, he wrote this poem and sent it to
Triple C!
the next morning.
Now, it's time to review and analyze the poem. It's Chapman's Homer. It's Chapman.
Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told, that deep-browed Homer ruled as his demesne.
Although at first it seems that Keats is explaining his own physical journeys, he is actually describing experiences that he has read about in literary works. His reference to Homer shows his familiarity with famous literary works and poets. It's evident that Keats is talking in the first person. The reference to the Western Islands and Apollo remind the reader of Odysseus and his travels. The goodly states and kingdoms seen are metaphors for John Keats's previous experiences with Homer's works.
Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold.
There is a shift in Keats' tone of voice and attitude at this point. Like many Petrarchan sonnets, the first half of the poem is known as the octet, which fittingly is comprised of 8 lines. The octet is the part of the poem that introduces the problem. The second half of the poem is known as the sestet. This part of the Petrarchan sonnet aims to resolve the introduced problem. Line 9 is where the shift occurs. In Chapman's Homer, John Keats writes, "Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold." Upon reading Chapman's translation of Homer, he experiences a rediscovery, as described by breathing its pure serene. This begins the shift in attitude that the sestet completes.
Then fell I, like some watcher of the skies, when a new planet swims into his ken.
Keats begins the final sestet by comparing his rediscovery to the discovery of Uranus, which was a new planet at the time of his writing. Just imagine a new planet being discovered.
Or like stout Cortez, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent, upon a peak in Darien.
Keats continues to compare his discovery with that of a journey. He uses such an allusion to describe how he feels about discovering Chapman's translation. He uses Hernan Cortez as an allusion to compare his feelings towards reading Chapman's Homer. Although Cortez was not the first to discover the Pacific, Cortez's rediscovery is similar to that of Keats. The feeling of rediscovering the ocean is evident when he says all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise.
Balboa was in fact the first one to discover the Pacific Ocean, not Cortez. Whether or not Keats chose Cortez over Balboa on purpose remains unclear and uncertain. If he did, we, as the readers, can infer that Keats's message was that being second does not hinder the magnitude of a personal discovery. This revelation was extremely profound for Keats, and he, as the author of this poem, conveys this idea via the journey metaphor. Alright, that was sort of a lot to take in, so here's what you should know about the poem. The first part talks about an intellectual, and in this case, literary journey of John Keats. But there's a problem, because while Keats knows that his journey was important, he never felt such a powerful reaction to it until he read Chapman's Homer. This is the discovery described in the latter part of the poem. Keats's discovery is personal, it is unique, and it has more than any material value. What Keats is saying is, exploration leads to discovery, and really the discovery wouldn't have meant as much if Keats hadn't read Homer before. We hope you enjoyed the poem.
It's Chapman's Homer! It's Chapman's Homer! I can't do it anymore. I just can't. I'm not feeling it. Okay, this is the end. Bye.
Bye.
Bye! That was
Yeah.
just